Hi yogis, my name is Bre and this is Flo. And in today's video, we're going to be breaking down 4 poses that are used quite often in yoga classes. That would be your high plank, chaturanga, upward dog, and downward dog. The more often that you practice yoga, if you're practicing a few times a week, that turns into about 1,000 times a year. So that's why it's really important and vital that you're practicing these foundational poses in a very safe way to protect your body and make sure that you're reducing your risk for injury. Thank you for tuning in. Grab your mat and let's begin. So we're going to begin on all fours. So come into a tabletop position. So the wrists are stacked directly below the shoulders, knees below the hips. So just to start with, in these poses, the foundation is incredibly important. So we're going to start from the ground up. So that, of course, begins with the wrists. We have an entire video on wrist warm-up, so we recommend going back to that if you haven't watched it yet. So I'm not going to be going into as much detail with the wrists, but just a few pointers. So the wrist placement is about shoulder width apart. Some people have their arms a little bit too wide or too close, so try to stack them directly below the shoulders. Now with the wrists, you want to be pressing down mostly with the inside of your hand. So that part, the base of your index finger and the base of your thumb knuckle, that's the part that you want to be pressing down mostly with. The reason for that is that starts to alleviate the pressure on the outside fiber cartilage of your wrist. And that takes a lot of the pressure and weight off the wrist throughout your practice. So now that you know where to press, and when you have that tent start to pop up with the hand, you just press that back down. So it takes a little bit of practice, especially at the beginning, to press down that tent. But it's really important to add to your practice. So now moving up the arms as we start to come into high plank. You can follow along with this physically, or you can just watch the first time also. So let's come into high plank now. So you start to lift the knees. So a few things in high plank. So first we lift the hips about the same height as the shoulders instead of having that straight line, because naturally when you have this straight line, you tend to dump into your low back. And we want to lift the hips up to get the weight out of the low back, and that also engages the core. So without actually moving anything, you can imagine that your toes are pulling closer to your wrists, and that's going to fire up the whole front side of your body. So now secondly, with the shoulders are the most mobile joint in the body, so it's incredibly important to be pushing the ground away and getting up outside of your bicep tendon and not dumping into the shoulder sockets. So in order to do that, you're just going to push the ground away. You protract the shoulders away from each other and try to create as much space as you can between the ground and your chest. So you're really pushing up as much as you can. So now Flo will demo as you sink down and then lift up, sink down, lift up. So you can see the difference is about 6 inches where he can move up and down, moving the shoulder blades on and off the back. So now that you have the ground pushed away, you've protracted the shoulders, you've lifted the hips. With the arms, you're going to rotate the biceps forward. So the eyes of the elbows are almost facing forward. Again, that's going to open up by externally rotating the shoulder. That's going to open up and get the pressure off of that bicep tendon. So the last thing to mention in high plank is to come onto the ball of your foot with the feet instead of all the way up on the toes. So the reason for that is because as you start to shift forward to come into chaturanga, you need that extra couple inches to come forward before you lower down. Otherwise, if you just lower straight down, your elbows is not going to be directly above the wrist, which is what you really want. So as we shift forward, come down into chaturanga pose, you see that he already stacked the elbow directly above the wrist, and then it's almost that 90-degree angle in the arm. So it's incredibly important to continue externally rotating the arms to move that bicep forward and hug the elbows into the sides. So the more that you let your arms bow out, the more pressure you're putting on the front side of your shoulder, that bicep tendon once again. So we really want to alleviate the pressure from that to reduce inflammation. So the main ways, again, are Keep that 90-degree angle. Don't let the shoulder drop lower than the elbow, and externally rotate the biceps. So move the biceps forward. So still, you're pressing up between the shoulder blades, protracting the shoulders, the hips are lifted, and you're on the toes. Neck is neutral, and the gaze is straight down at the ground. So now as we move into upward dog, you start to flip the feet, and then push the ground away as you lift up off the ground. So the main point in upward dog is the only thing touching the ground should be the palms of your hands and the tops of your feet. So as you're pushing into this, it's incredibly important to engage the glutes. So this is going to help protect your low back. And then again, you see the bone stacking happening here, where it goes from the shoulder, elbow, down to the wrist. Everything is stacked. Now here it's really important to gaze forward. Oftentimes you see yogis turn their head all the way up towards the sky. And of course this looks like it's a deeper back bend. It looks great on Instagram, but it's really not benefiting you at all. In fact, it's starting to shorten this muscle here in your neck that runs from the base of your skull to your clavicle. It starts to shorten that muscle the more that you dip your head back. So it's okay to do it once in a while in your practice if it's intentional, but it's something that you want to break the habit and get out of. It's better to just have the neck neutral and gaze forward, and then gently pull the head back. So now as we start to move from high plank into downward dog, we're going to lift the hips, push the ground away, and engage the core to slowly come into downward dog. Flip the feet. And then from here, again, it's important to rotate the biceps forward, push the ground away, pressing down mostly with the base of the index finger and the base of the thumb, that inside part of the hand. And then you want to find as much length in your spine as you can. So you lift the hips towards the sky. If you need to keep the knees slightly bent, you can. It's also okay if your heels don't touch the ground. It's not important. What you're really trying to find is this length in the spine from your wrist to your hips. The head hangs naturally, or the neck is neutral. You don't need to crank it up or down. So now as you flow through this entire sequence together, you can connect it with your breath. So here from downward dog, take an inhale, shift forward, high plank. Exhale, lower down, chaturanga. Inhale, upward dog. And exhale to downward dog. So at the beginning, these movements, now that you've know a little bit more about the reasons and the mechanics around why we do it, it's probably going to add a lot more strength to your practice and a lot more challenge. So that's why we often see this sequence done in a very loose way, because it's very challenging. It's hard to hold these correct, especially chaturanga with that 90-degree angle. Oftentimes students flop all the way to the ground and then they crank their back up to do upward dog. So it's painful to witness that sometimes, because we know how damaging that can be on the body. So our best advice is to move with control, move with awareness, and really focus on what muscles are being activated and what the function of the pose is. We hope that helped you today in your practice. Feel free to comment below with any questions or shoot us a message. We'd love to hear from you, and be sure to subscribe to watch more of our videos coming. Thank you so much. Namaste.